You won't last long out here, Comanche warned, but when he removed the sack, he recognized her face. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a cold and unforgiving morning when Emily found herself stumbling through the dense brush of the northern plains. She had been running for days, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the heavy breath of fear in her chest. Her once pristine white dress was now torn and stained, her bare feet raw from the rough terrain. A forced marriage to a ruthless outlaw had driven her to escape, but now, far from any safety, she was being hunted. Emily's heart raced as she moved through the wilderness, her thoughts clouded with panic. Every step seemed to echo, amplifying the feeling that her pursuers were closing in on her. She glanced back once more, barely able to make out the distant silhouettes of the men who had been chasing her for the past 2 days. They were relentless. She had no doubt that if they caught her, they would not show mercy. The sounds of horses' hooves grew louder, and she knew she had to find cover, or her journey would end here. Suddenly, the noise stopped. Emily froze, listening intently. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. The silence that followed felt like a trap, and just as she began to take a cautious step forward, she felt the sharp sting of something cold against her neck. The pressure was brief, but enough to freeze her in place. A voice, low and commanding, cut through the stillness. You won't last long out here, the Comanche warned. Emily's breath caught in her throat, and she slowly turned her head to find a figure emerging from the trees. A warrior, dressed in leather and fur, his dark eyes focused on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't move, didn't speak again, but his presence alone was enough to send a warning. He was dangerous. Her body tensed as she considered running, but her legs felt like lead, and the overwhelming exhaustion of days without sleep weighed heavily on her. The warrior took a step closer, his face unreadable as he reached for the sack she had clutched tightly in her arms. He moved swiftly, almost effortlessly, and with a single motion, he pulled the sack away from her grasp. She gasped, her heart sinking as she realized what he had done. The sack fell open, revealing a bundle of belongings, and something else. The warrior's eyes widened in recognition as he stared at the contents. Slowly, he lowered his weapon, a flicker of shock crossing his features. Emily watched, confused and trembling, as the warrior's gaze moved from the sack to her face. It can't be, he whispered, his voice barely audible. She stared at him, heart pounding in her chest. Who was this man? And why did he seem to recognize her? The warrior stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers, his mind racing with thoughts he had long buried. This wasn't just a runaway bride. This wasn't just a woman fleeing a life of torment. This was someone he had once known, someone from his past. As the realization struck, everything changed. The chase, the danger, and the hunt. All of it seemed to vanish in an instant. Now, standing in front of him, was a woman he had never expected to see again. And the twist of fate that had brought them together was only beginning to unfold. I'm not sure how you ended up here, but fate has a way of leading us down paths we never expect. The warrior's gaze never wavered as he studied Emily, still unsure if he was seeing things clearly. It had been years since he had laid eyes on anyone from his past, and now, in the middle of this wild, unforgiving land, she was standing right in front of him. The same woman, the one he had once known, before the fire, before everything changed. But the look in her eyes told him something had changed in her too. She wasn't the scared girl he remembered, the one who had run from everything, hoping to escape her fate. No, this woman was hardened by time, shaped by the cruelty of life she had faced. She looked at him now with fear, yes, but there was something else there. Defiance, determination, a fire that matched his own. The Comanche warrior cleared his throat, his hand still gripping the sack. The air between them crackled with the weight of their unspoken history. You should not be here, he said finally, his voice low but steady. He could not place why he felt this strange pull toward her, but the truth of it was undeniable. His instincts, honed by years of survival in the harshest of environments, told him she was someone he should not trust. But something else urged him to listen to her, to hear her side. Emily looked around, the cold wind whipping through her tangled hair. She had no idea what to say, no idea how to explain the madness that had led her here. "I don't want to be here," she replied, her voice shaky but firm. "I don't know how I ended up running, or why I was sent here to be a bride for that man. But I had to escape. I had to leave." She didn't mention the terror that had gripped her when she'd first seen the outlaws' men closing in on her. She didn't mention how her heart had nearly given out when she had seen his face up close. But here she was, in the middle of nowhere, with no one but this warrior who seemed to know something about her, something that made her feel vulnerable. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The warrior's eyes softened, just a fraction. The long silence stretched between them, as if he were weighing something he wasn't ready to share. Finally, he spoke. "I was once someone like you," he said. "I ran too. But you cannot run forever." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" He gestured toward the wilderness around them, the endless stretch of trees and mountains. "This land does not forgive. It has its own rules. You have to decide which path you will follow. There is no middle ground here." Emily felt the weight of his words sink deep into her chest. She had thought the hardest part was over when she had managed to escape the clutches of the outlaws' gang. But now, facing the reality of the wilderness, she realized how little she truly understood. The warrior turned, his back now to her. He motioned for her to follow. "Come," he said. "I'll take you to the tribe. They will protect you, but you must earn their trust." Emily hesitated, unsure of what to do next. She had no choice but to follow him. She had no other place to go, no other people to turn to. She had learned the hard way that survival wasn't just about running away. It was about understanding the world around you. As she followed him, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would she find the safety she was looking for with this strange, silent warrior and his people? Or would she be left to face the same dangers that had chased her for so long? Her heart pounded in her chest as the warrior led her deeper into the forest. Every step felt like a new beginning. But what kind of beginning it would be, she couldn't yet tell. All she knew was that she couldn't go back. And in that moment, she understood that this was a fight for her future. And she would have to fight to survive. I had no idea what to expect as I followed the warrior deeper into the forest. His movements were swift, confident, and almost unnatural, as if he were one with the land itself. Every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig underfoot, seemed to pass unnoticed by him, while I stumbled behind, my eyes darting nervously to the shadows that loomed around us. The warrior did not speak, but his presence was enough to keep me moving forward, each step taking me farther from the world I once knew. The only sound that filled the air was the soft crunch of the forest floor beneath our feet. Soon, we reached a clearing, and I saw the edge of a village ahead. The Comanche's camp was unlike anything I had ever seen. Tents were arranged in a circle, smoke rising from small fires, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. It was a world so different from the one I had left behind, yet it felt strangely welcoming. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope as I saw the people of the tribe, their faces full of life and energy. The warrior finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "You will be safe here, but you must prove yourself." I nodded, unsure of what he meant, but feeling that there was no turning back now. As we approached the village, several eyes turned to look at us, their gazes curious but wary. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as we passed through the camp. Everyone seemed to be sizing me up. The warrior stopped in front of one of the larger tents, gesturing for me to follow him inside. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and smoke. A tall, stern-looking man sat at a table, his eyes sharp and calculating. This must have been the chief. "This is the one?" the chief asked, his voice gravelly. The warrior nodded. "She is the one who escaped. She will need protection." The chief regarded me for a long moment, his gaze piercing, before he finally spoke again. "You seek protection, but what can you offer us in return?" The words hit me hard, and for a moment, I felt small and insignificant. What could I possibly offer them? I had nothing but my life, and I had already run from everything I once knew. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The chief raised an eyebrow and motioned for me to sit. "Do not be afraid. We protect our own here. But you must show us you are worthy of that protection. You will help us, and in return, we will help you." I didn't understand what he meant by help us, but I had no choice but to accept. What must I do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The chief's lips curled into a slight smile. You will work. You will learn our ways. You will fight if necessary. His words were heavy, filled with the weight of a life I wasn't sure I was ready for. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. I'll do whatever it takes. The chief nodded, his eyes softening just a little. Good. You will learn the way of the tribe. And if you succeed, you will belong to us. You will be safe. It was all too much to process, and yet, it felt like a lifeline. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. The warrior who had brought me here stood by the entrance of the tent, his face unreadable. I wondered if he would ever speak to me again, or if I would be left to fend for myself in this strange new world. But for now, I had no other choice but to follow their rules. The next few days passed in a blur of unfamiliar customs and harsh training. I was taught how to handle a bow, how to track animals through the forest, and how to move silently through the night. There was little time for rest, but each lesson brought me closer to becoming part of this new world. At night, I would sit alone by the fire, reflecting on what had brought me here. I had run from a life of fear and uncertainty, only to find myself in a place that seemed just as dangerous, yet oddly comforting. The warrior who had rescued me would sometimes watch from a distance, his eyes always following my movements, but he never spoke. I didn't understand him, nor did I know if he understood me. But there was a part of me that hoped he would. One evening, as the sun began to set and the camp grew quieter, the warrior approached me. You are learning quickly, he said, his voice softer than before. I glanced up at him, surprised by the words. I am trying, I replied, though I still felt like an outsider. He nodded, his expression unreadable. You have strength. That is why you were chosen. The tribe sees it. I wasn't sure if he meant the strength I had shown by escaping or the one he saw in me now. But I didn't question him. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was becoming someone capable of surviving this harsh world. The warrior sat beside me, his presence solid and reassuring. For a moment, we sat in silence, watching the flames dance in front of us. It was then that I realized something crucial. I wasn't alone anymore. Not in this place. Not with these people. I was here to stay. I woke early the next morning, the sun barely rising above the horizon, casting long shadows across the camp. The crisp morning air bit at my skin as I sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames offering some comfort. The previous days had been filled with hard lessons and endless training. But now, for the first time, I felt like I was truly part of something. The warrior, whose name I still didn't know, was already up, his dark figure moving swiftly through the camp as he prepared for the day ahead. He barely spoke to me, yet his presence was always there, like a shadow, watching, observing. I could feel the weight of his eyes on me, but he never gave me the chance to ask the questions that swirled in my mind. Why had he saved me? Why had he brought me here? The answers seemed so far away, but I was starting to understand that in this world, questions didn't always need answers. Survival did. I spent the day training alongside the others, learning how to use a bow, how to track game, how to move silently through the underbrush. The tribe was patient with me, though they never spoke much. The few words they did offer were always sharp and to the point. There was no room for idle chatter here. The tribe's way of life was focused on survival, and every second of the day was spent preparing for the challenges of the wild. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting a golden hue over the camp, the chief called for a gathering. I followed the warrior into the center of the village, where the fire crackled and the tribe's elders sat in a circle, their faces unreadable. The chief, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, looked at me with steady eyes. You have trained well, he said, his voice deep and commanding. But the real test is yet to come. My heart skipped a beat. I had been prepared for hard training, but I had no idea what he meant by the real test. The chief stood, his gaze sweeping over the gathered tribe. The time has come for you to prove yourself. The hunt is tomorrow, and you will join us. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and I could feel the weight of them pressing down on me. The hunt was a sacred ritual in the tribe, a rite of passage that separated the warriors from the rest. To join the hunt was to be accepted fully into their fold, but failure would mean rejection. I felt a surge of panic rise in my chest, but I quickly suppressed it. had no choice but to prove myself. The warrior who had saved me, the one I had been training with, gave me a small nod as he stood beside me. "You are ready," he said quietly. I wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at me. I had never been part of anything like this before. My life had been one of running, of hiding, of trying to survive on my own. Now, I was about to face the ultimate test, surrounded by people who had known only this harsh, unforgiving world. I barely slept that night, the weight of the upcoming hunt heavy on my mind. The sounds of the camp slowly faded as the tribes settled into their tents, but I stayed awake, staring at the stars above. I could hear the faint rustling of the wind through the trees, the distant calls of night animals. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, but it was a fragile peace, one that could be shattered at any moment. The next morning, the air was thick with anticipation. The tribe gathered near the edge of the camp, each member preparing for the hunt in their own way. I watched as the warriors adjusted their weapons, checking their bows and knives with practiced precision. The chief stepped forward, his presence commanding. "Today we hunt. You will prove your worth, or you will be left behind." I nodded, my stomach tight with fear, but there was no turning back now. The warrior beside me gave me a final glance, his eyes steady. "Follow me," he said. And with that, we set off into the wilderness. The forest was dense, the trees towering high above us, their branches swaying gently in the wind. The sounds of the hunt filled the air, a mix of quiet whispers and the soft rustle of feet moving through the leaves. As we moved deeper into the woods, the warriors signaled for me to stay low. We were hunting deer, a challenge even for the most seasoned hunters. The wind shifted, and I could feel the tension in the air. We were close now, so close I could almost taste the fear of the prey. Suddenly, the warrior moved, swift as a shadow, and I followed without thinking. We reached the clearing just in time to see the deer break through the brush, its dark eyes wide with panic. The chase had begun. My heart pounded in my chest as I raised my bow, the tension in the string mirroring the fear inside me. The deer darted, its legs carrying it faster than I could keep up, but the warrior was ahead, his every movement a blur of precision. The hunt was on. The world around me seemed to fade away as I focused on the task at hand. The sounds of the tribe behind me, the rustling of the trees, the scent of the earth, all of it disappeared. All that mattered was the deer and the arrow I was about to release. Time seemed to slow as I drew the string back. With a steady breath, I let it fly. The arrow whistled through the air, a perfect shot. The deer faltered and collapsed, its life slipping away in an instant. The hunt was over, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly earned my place. The warrior looked at me, his expression unreadable, but I could see the faintest flicker of approval in his eyes. I had done it, and in that moment, I knew that I was no longer an outsider. I had become part of the tribe. I had never felt a moment like this. The satisfaction of the hunt still lingered in my body, but something else had taken root as well. A deep, unfamiliar sense of belonging. The tribe had accepted me, not just as a stray woman looking for refuge, but as someone who could stand among them, as someone who had earned her place. That night, as we gathered around the fire, I felt the weight of their gazes, no longer filled with suspicion, but with something else, respect. The chief nodded toward me across the fire. "You have proven yourself worthy," he said, his voice carrying through the quiet hum of the camp. "But this is just the beginning. You must learn the ways of the land, and you must understand the burden of what we carry." His words, heavy with meaning, hung in the air like a challenge. I nodded, though I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I was ready to learn. The next few days were spent in silence, filled with the rhythm of the tribe's life. We moved through the forest together, hunting, gathering, and surviving as one. But there was a quiet intensity to it all, a bond one had never experienced before. The warriors, led by the same man who had saved me, took me deeper into the wilderness, teaching me to read the land. They showed me how to track animals, how to follow the signs left by the trees and the earth itself. Each lesson brought me closer to them, to their way of life. I learned that survival here wasn't just about strength, but about understanding. The land spoke to those who knew how to listen. And as the days passed, I found myself learning to listen. I was no longer the outsider I once was. The tribe's customs began to make sense, their practices no longer strange to me. They became part of me. One afternoon, while I was out hunting with the warrior, something unexpected happened. We had just returned to the village after a long day of tracking deer when we heard the distant cry of a scout. The warrior turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Stay close," he said, his voice sharp with urgency. We moved swiftly, our feet barely making a sound as we entered the woods again. The scout was waiting for us, his face grim. "The outlaws are near," he said, breathless from his run. "They've been spotted just beyond the river, and they're moving fast." The warrior's jaw tightened, and I could see the fire burning in his eyes. He had not forgotten his past, the things he had lost. He had not forgiven those who had taken it from him. "Gather the others," he ordered, his voice cold and steady. "Prepare for war." I felt the weight of his words sink in. The air was thick with tension, but I had no time to question. The tribe moved as one, preparing for whatever would come next. The men gathered their weapons, the women and children took shelter, and I, for the first time, felt like I had a purpose here. I wasn't just a woman hiding from her past anymore. I was part of something greater. The warrior stood beside me, his eyes scanning the horizon. "This is your test," he said quietly. "You will fight with us, or you will stay behind. The choice is yours." His words were a challenge, a test of my own courage. I had learned how to survive, how to fight in the wild, but this was different. This was no longer about proving myself to them. This was about fighting for something I believed in, for the tribe, for the people who had shown me kindness when I had nothing to give. I took a deep breath and nodded. "I will fight." The warrior gave a small nod of approval. "Good." The attack came just as the sun began to dip below the trees, casting long shadows across the camp. The outlaws were close, and their fire was visible through the trees. We moved in silence, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. The tribe's warriors were prepared, their weapons drawn and ready. I was positioned at the edge of the camp, a bow in hand, my heart pounding in my chest. The first arrow flew, and the chaos began. It was like nothing I had ever experienced. The air was filled with the sounds of battle, shouting, the clash of metal, the sharp twang of arrows being released. I moved quickly, my training kicking in as I aimed and fired. I saw the outlaws closing in, but the warriors fought with fierce precision, their movements like a well-oiled machine. It was the battle I had never expected to face, but the one I now knew was necessary. As the fight raged on, I felt a surge of adrenaline unlike anything I had ever felt before. This was my fight. This was my tribe. And I was ready. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. The outlaws, overwhelmed by the tribe's ferocity, retreated into the forest, leaving behind the wreckage of the fight. I stood in the aftermath, my bow still in my hand, my body trembling from the rush of the battle. The warrior came to stand beside me, his gaze sharp. "You fought well," he said, his voice low. I looked at him, the weight of the battle settling in my chest. "I fought for you," I said quietly, my voice steady. The warrior's eyes softened just slightly. "And we fought for you." In that moment, I knew I had truly found a place to call home. I woke up to the sound of birds calling in the early morning light. The camp was still, with only the faint rustling of the trees around us breaking the silence. I could feel the weight of the battle from the night before in my muscles, the strain of every movement still fresh in my body. But as I lay there in the quiet, I knew that this was far from over. The outlaws had retreated, but they would return. They always did. The warrior's words from the day before echoed in my mind. "This is your test." I had fought well, but there was more to prove. I couldn't let the fear of failure stop me now, not when I had finally found a place to belong. As the sun began to rise, casting a soft orange glow over the camp, I got to my feet. The warrior was already up, standing by the fire, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You're up early," he said, his voice calm as always. "I could say the same to you." I replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. He glanced at me briefly, his face unreadable, before turning his attention back to the woods. "There's a storm coming," he said, his tone matter of fact. "We need to prepare." I nodded, following his gaze. The sky was clear, but I trusted him. He had an uncanny ability to read the land, to know when danger was near. Without another word, we gathered the tribe together, preparing for the storm that we knew was coming. The warriors checked their weapons, the women gathered supplies, and the children were ushered into the safety of the tents. The tribe moved with practiced efficiency, each person knowing their role. As the clouds began to gather in the sky, a sense of unease settled over me. It wasn't just the storm that worried me. It was what lay beyond the storm. The outlaws, I knew, were still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike again. They weren't just after us for the fight. They were after something more, something deeper. The warrior and I stood at the edge of the camp, watching the horizon where the storm clouds were growing darker by the minute. "Do you think they'll come?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to me, his eyes soft but serious. "They will," he said simply. "But we're ready." I wasn't so sure. I had fought beside the tribe before, but this felt different. The air was thick with tension, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for the first strike. And then, as if on cue, the wind picked up, and the storm hit with a fury that only nature could unleash. The sky split open with lightning, and the rain came down in sheets. The camp was plunged into chaos as the wind howled through the trees, bending them to its will. But despite the storm, the tribe held its ground. We worked together, reinforcing the tents, securing the firewood, and making sure that everyone was safe. The storm was relentless, but it didn't stop us. As the hours passed, the storm's fury seemed to match the growing sense of dread that weighed heavily on my chest. I could feel the tension rising in the camp, and I knew that we weren't just preparing for a storm. We were preparing for something far worse. The night dragged on, and as the storm finally began to subside, a new sound reached my ears. Faint at first, like the whisper of a distant drum, the sound grew louder. A low hum, rhythmic and steady, echoing through the trees. The warriors stiffened, their eyes narrowing as they listened. It was the sound of horses, and not just a few. The outlaws had returned. They had come for us, just like we knew they would. The chief gave a signal, and the tribe sprang into action, each warrior moving with purpose. The women and children were ushered into the tents, their faces tense with fear, but resolute. We were ready. The outlaws, however, were not. As they emerged from the shadows of the storm, they seemed smaller than I remembered, their bravado muted by the fierce determination of the tribe. I stood beside the warrior, my heart racing, my bow ready. I had proven myself once, but this was the real test. I had to be ready. The battle was brutal. The outlaws were skilled, but they were no match for the warriors of the tribe. The sound of arrows flying, the clash of metal, and the shouts of combat filled the air. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos. The tribe fought as one, their movements synchronized, their focus unyielding. I moved with them, my bow drawn and my arrows flying. I wasn't just defending the camp anymore. I was defending my place here, with them, among them. The outlaws began to retreat, their numbers dwindling as they realized they were no match for us. The warrior was at my side, his face set in a grim determination as he fought off one of the last remaining attackers. With a single, swift movement, he brought the man down. The battle was over. We had won, but the victory was bittersweet. As the dust settled, I looked around the camp, taking in the faces of those who had fought beside me. We had lost some. Some were injured, others were dead. The cost of survival was always high, but we had won. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had found a place where I truly belonged. I woke the next morning to the sound of birds chirping in the trees, but there was a heavy silence that hung over the camp. It wasn't the usual quiet after a battle, but something else, something deeper, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The outlaws had been pushed back, but the fight wasn't over. There was something about the way the warriors moved, the way their eyes scanned the horizon, that told me we were on the edge of something even more dangerous. The warrior I had fought beside was already up, preparing his bow, his face set in the familiar, unreadable expression. I knew better than to ask him questions. He had taught me that in this world, action spoke louder than words. And right now, the only thing that mattered was the next move. The tribe gathered in silence, each member moving with purpose. The chief stepped forward, his gaze piercing, his body tense. "They will return," he said, his voice low but steady. "This land has always been a battleground, and we must prepare." It wasn't just the outlaws I feared now. It was the uncertainty of what would come next. The warrior beside me seemed to sense my hesitation, and for the first time, he spoke to me with something that resembled compassion. "The storm is over," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But there are always more storms." I nodded, understanding what he meant. I had learned that lesson the hard way. In this life, survival wasn't just about fighting. It was about being prepared for the unexpected. The days that followed were filled with constant motion. The warriors trained harder, their movements sharper, their focus unyielding. I trained alongside them, learning the skills I would need to survive in this harsh world. There was no room for weakness, no room for doubt. Each day, I pushed myself harder. Each day, I felt the weight of my decisions, the weight of my place in this tribe, settle deeper into my bones. It was clear to me now that the land I had come to depend on was not as forgiving as I had once thought. The storms weren't just literal. They were tests of character, tests of loyalty, tests of survival. One afternoon, as we were out hunting, the wind began to pick up. The warriors signaled for us to stop, and we crouched low, listening to the eerie silence that had overtaken the forest. The animals had gone quiet, and the trees swayed in the growing wind. It felt like the calm before a storm, and I could feel my heart racing. The warrior motioned for me to stay close as we moved through the forest, our steps light but purposeful. It wasn't long before we came upon a familiar sight. A small group of outlaws, their faces hidden under hoods, moving silently through the trees. They had returned, just as the chief had said they would. The warrior's hand rested on his knife, his eyes scanning the group. "Stay behind me," he whispered, his voice low and steady. I didn't hesitate, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over me. This time, there was no retreat. This time, we were going to face them head-on. The outlaws hadn't seen us yet, but they were closing in fast. The warrior raised his hand, signaling the others to move into position. I followed him as he led us closer, my breath steady despite the fear gnawing at me. The tension was palpable, like the air before a lightning strike. We were close now, so close I could hear the outlaws' voices, their hushed murmurs as they discussed their next move. The warrior moved like a shadow, his steps silent as he closed in on the group. I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest. The moment we had been waiting for arrived. With a swift motion, the warrior lunged, his knife cutting through the air. The outlaws didn't have a chance to react. The first one fell, his cry barely escaping his throat before he hit the ground. The rest of the tribe moved in, their weapons drawn, their faces set in grim determination. The fight was quick, brutal. I fought alongside them, my bow drawn and my arrows flying. I had never felt more alive, more connected to the land and to the people around me. The outlaws were outnumbered, but they fought fiercely, their desperation clear in their eyes. But it wasn't enough. The tribe's strength, honed through years of living in this harsh world, proved too much. The last of the outlaws fell, their cries silenced by the weight of our resolve. As the dust settled, I stood among the warriors, my body aching from the fight, but my heart filled with something else, pride. I had fought for this tribe. I had fought for my place here. And I had proven myself. The warrior turned to me, his expression unreadable. "You did well," he said, his voice low. "You are one of us now." I nodded, though I didn't fully understand the weight of his words. But I could feel it in my chest, a connection to this place, to these people. I was no longer the scared woman who had fled her past. I was a warrior in my own right. As we made our way back to camp, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The outlaws were defeated, for now. But the battle was far from over. I had learned that in this world, peace was fleeting, and survival was never guaranteed. The storm had passed, but there would always be more. And I was ready. I woke to the sound of the forest, the soft rustling of leaves, the distant calls of birds, and the steady rhythm of the wind that had become as familiar to me as the beating of my own heart. The night had passed without incident, but the tension in the air was still palpable. We had fought back the outlaws, but I knew they would return, just as the warrior had said. There would be no rest for the weary. The tribe, however, had shown no sign of slowing down. They moved with purpose, their faces grim but resolute. Even in the aftermath of a battle, they were already preparing for the next. The warrior was up before me, as he always was, sharpening his knife with careful precision. I watched him for a moment, wondering what drove him, what pushed him to be so relentless. He had never spoken much about his past, but I had seen the scars that ran deeper than the ones on his skin. He carried a weight, one that I could feel even without understanding its full depth. He turned to me as I rose, his eyes assessing me with the same intensity they always had. "Today is another test," he said, his voice as calm as the morning. I nodded, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety twist in my stomach. "What must we do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the unease that stirred within me. He motioned for me to follow, leading me to the edge of the camp where the others were already gathered. The chief stood at the front, his eyes sharp as they scanned the horizon. "The storm is over," he said, his voice carrying through the silence. "But the true test of this land is yet to come. The outlaws are not the only threat we face. There are others, more dangerous, and they are watching." I felt the weight of his words sink in. The outlaws were only the beginning. The tribe had survived for centuries in this unforgiving land, but survival was never guaranteed. The chief's gaze moved from the horizon to me. "You have proven yourself in battle," he said, his voice steady but filled with something else, respect. "But you must now prove yourself in the trials of this land. You will face the wilderness itself. You will hunt, you will track, and you will survive." The challenge hung in the air like a storm ready to break. I had fought the outlaws, but this was different. This was not about facing men with weapons or fighting for survival in a world of chaos. This was about understanding the land, listening to it, and becoming part of it. It was a trial of patience, skill, and strength, a trial that no one had ever passed easily. The warrior beside me gave a small nod. "I will guide you," he said, his voice low. "But you must find your own way. Only then will you understand what it means to survive here." We moved quickly, the tribe's warriors, leading the way into the forest. The land seemed to shift around us as we moved deeper into the heart of the wilderness. The trees grew taller, the shadows darker, and the air thicker with the scent of earth and decay. It was a world that felt alive, breathing, and yet it was cold and unforgiving. We walked for hours, the weight of the silence between us pressing heavily on my shoulders. The warrior did not speak, but his presence was enough to guide me. The others moved in silence as well, their eyes alert, their senses finely tuned to the world around them. The tribe knew this land better than they knew their own hearts. It was a part of them, just as they were a part of it. As the day wore on, we reached a clearing, the ground soft with moss and leaves. The warrior stopped, his eyes scanning the trees. "This is where you will begin," he said, motioning to the land around us. "You will track the deer, you will find their path, and you will bring one down. Do not rush. You must understand the land before you can take from it." The others scattered, each moving with purpose, while I stood still, trying to calm the storm of nerves in my chest. The warrior gave me one last glance, then moved into the trees, leaving me alone with the challenge. I knew what I had to do. I had tracked deer before, but not like this. In the world I had known, the land had always been something to run from, something to fear. But here, in this world, it was something to understand. I knelt to the ground, my hands brushing the earth as I searched for signs. The world around me seemed to hold its breath as I focused, listening to the whispers of the trees, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the faint traces of scent in the air. Slowly, I began to pick up the trail, following it with the precision the tribe had taught me. It wasn't just about speed or skill, it was about patience and respect. The deer had moved through the forest, their paths winding and unpredictable, but I was determined. I would not fail. The hours passed, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. The trail grew colder, but I didn't stop. I pushed forward, my body moving in sync with the rhythm of the land. And then, just as I thought I might lose the trail completely, I saw it, a flash of movement in the distance. A deer, grazing quietly, unaware of my presence. I took a deep breath, steadying my bow. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I drew the string back, my aim steady. The air seemed to hum with the tension, and in that instant, everything I had learned about survival, about this land, and about myself came into focus. The arrow flew, striking true. The deer fell with a soft thud, and I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, my heart racing. I had done it. I had survived. The warrior's voice came from behind me. "Well done," he said, his tone softer than usual. I turned to find him standing there, his eyes fixed on me with something I had never seen before, approval. "You understand now," he said. And in that moment, I did. I understood what it meant to be a part of this land, to survive, to belong. I stood beside the deer I had brought down, my breath steadying as I took in the stillness of the forest around me. The warrior was watching me closely, his eyes soft but sharp, as if measuring my every move. I felt the weight of the moment pressing in on me. The tribe had accepted me, but I knew that one mistake could change everything. I had proven myself on the hunt, but the true test wasn't just in taking down a deer. It was in living with the land, understanding it, and becoming one with it. The warrior spoke after a long silence, his voice low and deliberate. "You have learned well," he said. "But the real challenge is not over. You must continue to prove yourself to the tribe." I nodded, my heart quickening. I had thought I had done enough, but there was always more to learn, more to prove. As the warrior motioned for me to follow, I understood. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about living as the tribe did, embracing everything it meant to be a part of something larger than myself. The days passed in a blur of lessons and challenges. The tribe kept moving, each member carrying out their role. Without hesitation, I learned how to set traps, how to fish in the river, how to make tools from the materials we gathered. But the lessons went beyond the physical. They taught me how to listen to the land, how to read the weather in the rustling of the trees, and how to understand the language of the animals. At night, around the fire, the tribe would share stories, legends of their ancestors, of battles fought, of victories and losses that had shaped them into who they were. I sat quietly, absorbing it all, knowing that these stories weren't just tales. They were the heartbeat of the tribe, the foundation of everything they believed in. One evening, after the tribe had gathered around the fire, the chief called for a meeting. He looked at me with steady eyes, his face stern. "It is time for you to join us fully," he said. "Tomorrow, we will perform the ceremony." The words hung in the air like a promise, heavy with significance. I didn't fully understand what the ceremony entailed, but I could feel the gravity of it. This was the moment when I would be fully accepted into the tribe, when I would become one of them in every sense of the word. I spent the rest of the evening preparing in silence, my thoughts swirling with uncertainty and anticipation. The warrior, who had become my closest ally, approached me as I sat alone by the fire. "You are ready," he said quietly, his voice steady. I looked up at him, searching his face for some hint of what I should expect. "What happens tomorrow?" I asked, my voice soft. He didn't answer right away, but his eyes softened. "Tomorrow, you will be given a name," he said. "A name that binds you to this tribe, a name that honors your strength and your place among us." The weight of his words sank in, and I felt a surge of emotion that I hadn't expected. I wasn't just a stranger anymore. I wasn't just someone who had fled from a past I couldn't outrun. I was becoming part of something real, something that was mine, something that I could call home. The next day, the ceremony took place as the sun began to set, casting the camp in golden light. The tribe gathered in a circle, their faces illuminated by the firelight, their eyes filled with expectation. The chief stood at the center of the circle, holding a staff adorned with feathers and beads. He called me forward, his voice commanding but filled with respect. "You have proven your worth, shown your strength, and earned your place among us," he said. "From this day forward, you will carry the name of our ancestors. You will be known as Running Wind." The words resonated through me, and I felt a rush of pride and relief wash over me. I had come so far, and now I was truly one of them. The warrior stood beside me, his face serious, but there was something else in his eyes, pride, perhaps, or approval. "You have earned your name," he said, his voice softer now, "and you will carry it with honor." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. The ceremony continued as the tribe shared their blessings, each person stepping forward to offer their strength and support. The fire crackled, and I could feel the connection growing between us, between me and this land, between me and the people who had become my family. That night, as I lay beneath the stars, I felt a peace I had never known before. I had found my place here, and no matter what came next, I knew I was ready. I had faced the trials of the land, had fought beside the warriors, and had proven myself worthy of this life. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt that it was only just beginning. And whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I would face them with the strength of the tribe behind me. I woke the next morning with the sun rising over the distant hills, the orange glow seeping through the trees and casting long shadows on the ground. It was a quiet morning, one of those rare moments when the world seemed still, as if holding its breath. I stood up, feeling the coolness of the earth beneath my feet, my heart still heavy with the weight of the ceremony from the night before. Running Wind, the name that now belonged to me. I had earned it. I had earned my place with the tribe, among the warriors and hunters who had shown me more than just how to survive in the wilderness. They had shown me what it meant. To belong, to be part of something bigger than myself. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh morning air, and let the peace of the moment wash over me. The weight of the trials behind me still pressed on my chest, but today felt different. Today, I felt like I could face whatever came next. The warrior, who had become more than just my teacher, stood nearby, sharpening his knife in the morning light. He didn't speak, but I could feel his gaze on me, like always, steady and watchful. I approached him, my footsteps soft against the ground. "What now?" I asked, my voice carrying more confidence than I felt. He glanced at me, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if considering my question carefully. "Now, we prepare for what's coming." His words were simple, but I could hear the underlying meaning. The fight was never truly over. There would always be more to face, more challenges, more enemies. The world of the tribe was harsh, but it was also real. Every day was a battle for survival, for strength, for respect. I had learned that. I nodded, understanding that the path ahead wasn't just about learning the ways of the land, but about always being ready for what it would throw at me. The warrior motioned for me to follow, and we moved into the forest together. The other warriors were already in motion, preparing for the next phase of their duties. As we moved deeper into the woods, I felt the familiar tension creeping back into my chest. The forest was no longer just a place of beauty and quiet. It had become a battleground, a place where every movement mattered, where every decision could be the difference between life and death. We traveled for hours, the world around us shifting as the forest grew denser, the air thicker with the scent of pine and earth. The silence between us was comfortable now, no longer filled with the unease of our earlier interactions. The warrior was the first to speak, his voice low. "You've learned the ways of the land, of the hunt. But there is more you must know. You must learn the ways of the tribe's enemies." I turned to him, curiosity flickering in my chest. "The outlaws?" I asked. He shook his head, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. "Yes, but they are not the only ones. There are other tribes, others who will test your loyalty, your strength. You must understand them, not just as enemies, but as something to respect. Without respect, you cannot survive here." His words hung in the air, a challenge, a warning. It wasn't just about defeating enemies. It was about understanding them, knowing their ways, and preparing for the inevitable encounters that would come. "Are you ready for that?" he asked, his voice soft but sharp with intensity. I paused, thinking about what he said. The outlaws were only one part of the battle. There were other tribes, other dangers, and I had to be ready for all of it. I had already proven myself in battle, but this was different. This was about more than just surviving. It was about becoming part of the land, part of the fight for honor, for respect, for survival. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady. He glanced at me, his lips curling into a small, approving smile. "Good. Then let's go." We continued on, deeper into the forest, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of his words. The tribe was no longer just a place to run to, a place to escape from my past. It was a life I had chosen, a life I had earned. But the real challenge was just beginning. The land would continue to test me, as would the people who lived on it. But now, I knew I was ready. The warrior's voice broke through my thoughts. "In the end, it's not just about fighting," he said. "It's about understanding. The land, the people, the enemies. You must see it all, understand it all. Only then will you survive." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle into me. It wasn't enough to just be strong. I had to be wise. I had to know the land, know my enemies, and know the tribe I had become part of. The journey ahead would be long, but I was no longer afraid. I had found my place, and I would fight to keep it. I woke early the next morning, the crisp air of the forest filling my lungs as I stepped outside the tent. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft, golden light across the land. It was a quiet morning, one of those rare moments, when the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. But I knew better than to rest too long. The battle had been won, but there was always another challenge on the horizon. The warrior, who had become my closest ally, was already up, his dark silhouette moving through the trees. His presence was constant, like the forest itself, silent and steady, yet always there. As I stood watching him, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. He had shown me how to survive in this harsh world, not just by teaching me how to fight, but by showing me the wisdom of the land. He had helped me see the world in a way I never had before, not as something to fear, but as something to understand, to respect. "You're up early," he said, his voice as calm as ever, as he approached me. I smiled softly. "I could say the same about you." He gave a small nod, the corner of his lips twitching upward slightly. "We have much to do," he replied, his tone still serious. "The tribe needs your help." I raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" I asked, eager for the next step in my journey. "We are going deeper into the wilderness today," he said, his eyes steady. "There is much more you need to learn." The warrior had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was always with purpose. I trusted him, and I knew he wouldn't lead me astray. The rest of the tribe began to stir, and we gathered together for the journey. The chief, as always, led the way, his eyes sharp as he surveyed the forest around us. "Today, we move into the heart of the land," the chief said, his voice carrying authority. "The time has come for you to prove your loyalty, not just in battle, but in the trials of this land." I felt the weight of his words settle on me. I had earned my place in the tribe, but this was something deeper. It wasn't just about fighting or surviving. It was about understanding what it meant to be truly connected to this land, to become one with it. The warrior beside me gave me a brief, approving glance before turning his gaze back to the path ahead. We moved deeper into the forest, the trees growing thicker and the air heavier with the scent of pine and earth. The sounds of the wilderness filled the air, birds calling, the wind rustling the leaves, and I felt the connection to it all. The land was alive, and I was part of it. The journey took us farther from the camp, into territory I had never seen before. The path grew steeper, the terrain more rugged. But the tribe moved with ease, their steps sure and steady. It was as if they had become a part of the land itself, their movements perfectly attuned to the rhythms of the earth. As we climbed higher, I began to understand the wisdom of the tribe. This land was not just a place to survive. It was a place to be respected, a place that could give as much as it could take. And in order to survive, in order to thrive, we had to understand that balance. We reached a high ridge, the view stretching out before us, and the warrior stopped. He motioned for me to come closer. "This is where you will begin," he said, his voice low. "The test of the land is not about strength alone. It is about how well you understand its ways. The animals, the weather, the trees. They all speak, if you know how to listen." I looked out over the vast landscape before us, feeling the weight of the challenge. This was my test, not of battle, but of understanding. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the uncertainty that lingered in my chest. "You will track," the warrior said. "You will find the path of the mountain lion. It is a creature of the land, a hunter like you. To find it, you must learn its ways. To do that, you must first learn the land." I nodded, my heart racing with the realization of what he was asking. I had tracked before, but this was different. This was not just about following a trail. It was about becoming part of the land, about learning to understand its language. We spent the next several hours searching for signs of the mountain lion. The warrior taught me how to read the marks on the trees, how to listen for the subtle sounds in the forest. With each passing moment, I felt myself becoming more attuned to the land, my senses sharpening. It wasn't easy. The trail was faint, and the mountain lion was a cunning predator. But as the day wore on, I began to understand the land in a way I never had before. Every step, every sound, every scent, it all told a story. And by the time the sun began to set, I had found the mountain lion's path. It was a small victory, but it was enough to prove to myself that I had learned what the warrior and the tribe had taught me. The land was not just something to survive. It was something to understand, to respect, and to become part of. The warrior stood beside me, his face unreadable. "You did well," he said. His approval meant more to me than any battle. I had not only proven my skill, but I had also proven that I could truly live in harmony with this land. And that, I realized, was the true test of survival. I woke up early again, the sky still dark, a thin veil of mist hanging low over the land. The silence of the early morning was different now. The winds had shifted, and a sense of foreboding had settled in with the morning fog. I knew we were far from safe, no matter the victories we had claimed or the lessons I had learned. The tribe was still vulnerable, and the time for complacency had long passed. The warrior, who had become my guide and protector, was already at the edge of the camp, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. I walked toward him, my footsteps soft against the forest floor. As I approached, he didn't turn, but I could feel his awareness, like he knew exactly where I was before I even spoke. "There is no rest here," he said quietly, his voice steady as always. I paused, feeling the weight of his words. "I know," I replied. "I think we've all known that from the start." The warrior turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "It is not just about the fight," he said. "It is about understanding the land, and understanding those who would take it from you." His words struck deep, resonating with the lessons I had learned over the past weeks. The land wasn't just a backdrop for survival. It was a living, breathing entity that demanded respect and understanding. We didn't just fight for territory or resources. We fought to preserve a way of life, to protect something sacred. The warrior motioned for me to follow as he began to walk toward the forest. I fell into step beside him, my heart steadying with each step. There was something different in his manner today, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "The outlaws are not the only threat," he said after a long silence. "We must be prepared for those who move in the shadows, those who think they can take what is ours." I looked at him, trying to read his face, but he remained as unreadable as ever. "What do we do?" I asked. He paused, his gaze moving across the landscape. "We do what we have always done," he replied, his voice calm. "We prepare. We survive." His words held the weight of truth. The world around us was unpredictable. There would always be another threat, another challenge. Survival wasn't just about strength or skill. It was about resilience, the ability to endure no matter what came. As we continued into the forest, the sounds of the camp grew distant. The land seemed to close in around us, the trees thickening, the air growing heavier. The warrior moved with a sense of urgency now, his every step purposeful. We were heading toward the heart of the wilderness again, a place I had yet to truly understand. The deeper we went, the more I realized that this land was both a gift and a curse. It could provide, but it could also take away everything you had if you weren't careful. Hours passed, and the sky shifted from the pale gray of dawn to the deeper blues of the approaching afternoon. The warrior stopped abruptly, his hand signaling for silence. We were near the river now, and the air was thick with the scent of water and earth. He knelt, his hand brushing the ground as he scanned the area around us. "They're close," he muttered under his breath, and I felt my pulse quicken. The warrior's instincts were sharp, his connection to the land deeper than I had ever imagined. "Stay close," he whispered. We moved quietly. We crept forward, the trees thick around us. The sound of the river was louder now, and I could hear the distant calls of birds and the rustle of animals. But there was another sound, one that didn't belong, a soft, rhythmic thud. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what it was. Footsteps. Someone was coming. The warrior signaled for me to take cover, and we both slipped behind a large rock, watching through the trees. A group of men emerged, their figures barely visible in the shadows of the dense forest. They were armed, their movements cautious but purposeful. The warrior's hand tightened around his weapon, his eyes narrowed. "Outlaws," he muttered, his voice filled with disdain. I could see the tension in his body as he prepared to strike. "Wait," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "We need to know who they are, not just fight," I added. The warrior studied me for a moment, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Approval, maybe, or perhaps surprise. He nodded once, signaling for us to remain hidden. We watched in silence as the men moved past, unaware of our presence. It wasn't until they had passed that the warrior spoke again. "You were right," he said, his voice low. "The land doesn't just speak of danger. It speaks of opportunity. We have to be patient." We waited for what felt like hours, watching the men as they set up camp along the river. The warrior and I remained hidden, observing their movements, learning what we could about their numbers and their intentions. When the time came, we would strike, but not before we understood the situation fully. The lesson wasn't just in the fight. It was in the patience, the waiting, the watching. I had learned that in the wild, every decision mattered. Every move counted. And in that moment, I understood what the warrior had been trying to teach me. Survival wasn't about reacting. It was about understanding the land, understanding your enemies, and knowing when to make your move. The night fell, and we retreated into the forest, the sounds of the river and the outlaws' camp fading behind us. The warrior didn't speak as we made our way back to the camp, but I knew he was pleased with our decision. We had learned something today, something that would serve us in the future. And as I lay down to sleep that night, I felt a deep sense of peace. The world was still unpredictable, but I was no longer afraid. I had found my place in it, and I was ready for whatever came next. I woke the next morning to the sound of the forest coming alive, the morning light filtering through the trees and painting the camp in warm shades of orange and gold. It had been weeks since I joined the tribe, and in that time, I had learned more than I could have ever imagined. The land, the people, the battles, the hunts, all of it had shaped me. I was no longer the frightened woman who had fled from a life she couldn't control. I was now a part of something much larger than myself, a member of this tribe, with all the responsibilities and challenges that came with it. The warrior, as always, was the first to rise. His steady movements, his quiet strength, and the way he seemed to be at one with the land had become a familiar comfort to me. He had become not only my guide but also my anchor in this wild, unpredictable world. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were like lessons, like pieces of wisdom I had been searching for my whole life. I approached him as he gathered his gear, his movements fluid and practiced. "What's next?" I asked, my voice steady but filled with the anticipation of what lay ahead. He glanced at me, his eyes reflecting the same quiet intensity they always had. "The test is not over," he said simply. "But you are ready. Today, we will face our enemies once again." His words struck me deeply. I had proven myself on the hunt, in the battles, but this felt different. This wasn't just about fighting or surviving. It was about something more profound. The chief had spoken to me about loyalty, about the responsibility I now carried as a member of the tribe. Today, I would face that responsibility head-on. The tribe began to gather, their faces focused, their movements practiced. The sense of unity in the camp was palpable. We were ready. We had always been ready. The days of uncertainty were behind us. Now, we would stand together as one. The warriors, led by the chief, gathered their weapons, checking each one with careful precision. There was a quiet intensity in the air, an unspoken understanding that today was a day of reckoning. We had faced the outlaws, but the true test was ahead. The land itself would be our greatest challenge. We set off toward the mountains, the trees thinning as we ascended. The higher we went, the colder the air became. The warrior and I walked side by side, the silence between us comfortable but charged with the weight of what was to come. He didn't look at me, but I could feel the strength of his presence. He had been here before, in battles like this, but I had not. This was my first true test, the moment when I would be fully accepted or rejected by the tribe, by the land, and by myself. We reached the foot of the mountain as the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows over the ground. The chief turned to us, his face stern. "Tonight, we face them. The enemy will be waiting. They think we are weak, but we will show them that we are stronger than they could ever imagine." The air grew heavier as we moved closer to the enemy's camp, the tension building with each step. The warriors fell into formation, their steps silent, their focus unwavering. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, the realization that everything I had learned was leading to this. The battle wasn't just about skill or strength. It was about understanding the land, the enemy, and the tribe. The warriors were ready, but so was I. We moved into position under the cover of darkness, the moonlight filtering through the trees and casting eerie shadows on the ground. The enemy's camp was ahead, a small group of men gathered around a fire. They were unaware of our presence, too focused on their own plans to notice us creeping closer. I could feel the warrior beside me, his presence a steady force. He didn't need to say anything. We both knew what we had to do. As we got closer, the warriors signaled for me to move ahead. My heart raced. but I kept my breathing steady. I had trained for this moment, and now it was here. I crouched low, moving silently through the trees, my bow in hand. The sound of the river nearby was a constant hum in the background, but I focused on the task at hand. I reached the edge of the enemy camp, my bow drawn, the arrow notched. The leader of the enemy group sat with his back to me, completely unaware of the danger. I waited for the perfect moment. With a steady breath, I released the arrow. It flew through the air, striking true. The leader fell with a sharp cry, and chaos erupted in the camp. The warriors of the tribe moved in quickly, overwhelming the enemy with precision and speed. The battle was swift, brutal, and decisive. As the last of the enemy was driven back, I stood among the warriors, my heart pounding in my chest. The warrior who had guided me stood beside me, his face unreadable. But there was a flicker of something in his eyes, approval, maybe, a respect. I had faced my trial and emerged victorious. I had earned my place among the tribe. The chief approached, his face stoic but filled with quiet pride. "You have proven yourself," he said, his voice carrying the weight of leadership. "You are one of us now, in every way." And in that moment, I understood. The test had not been just about the fight. It had been about understanding the land, the tribe, and my place in all of it. I had found my home, my purpose, and I was ready for whatever came next. Immerse yourself in a thrilling world of survival, loyalty, and resilience with this captivating journey in the heart of the wild. Follow the story of a woman who escapes a dangerous past and finds a new life with a fierce tribe in the untamed wilderness. In this gripping tale, she faces trials, battles, and learns the true meaning of survival, all while discovering the power of understanding the land, the people, and herself. As the challenges unfold, she proves herself as a warrior in her own right, earning her place among the tribe. From intense battles with outlaws to the quiet moments of connection with nature, this story showcases the strength and determination needed to thrive in a harsh world. With themes of courage, loyalty, and a deep bond with the land, this is one of the most compelling Western stories you will read. As the woman adapts to her new life, she learns not only the ways of survival, but also the true meaning of belonging. Every step brings her closer to understanding the land and the people who have welcomed her. Whether it's navigating the forest or battling fierce enemies, this story offers a true reflection of what it takes to survive in the wild. A powerful testament to strength, courage, and resilience. This tale of Western stories will leave you captivated and inspired. Explore the rich world of Western stories where every battle is not just about survival, but about forging a new future and embracing the challenges that lie ahead.